Hello everyone and welcome back to Quickflicks, and it's a little bit green around here. Anyway, let's talk about Loki. Loki is a series on Disney Plus, the third in a Marvel Disney Plus series lineup that follows Tom Hiddleston's Loki once again, as this time around we follow the variant of Loki from Avengers Endgame that picked up the Tesseract. In fact, it starts off with a short little recap of where this variant of Loki came from and how he came across the TVA, or the Time Variance Authority. The Time Variance Authority accuses him of violating the, quote, sacred timeline and attempts to pretty much erase him from history. But then Owen Wilson's Mobius basically says that he could basically use this variant of Loki to try to track down another variant of Loki that has their own agenda. And so it's through this mystery of finding out who this variant is that they find out that there is a darker mystery within the TVA itself, and by the end of the season, we find out some pretty interesting secrets that have longer ramifications for the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So yeah, Loki is a show that pretty much for me, I thought it was just going to be a standalone series, kind of like WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But it turns out that this is actually a two-parter. It's going to get a season 2, supposedly next year. There was a little bit of a end tag in the 6th episode that basically said, we are going to return for season 2. Now, I've heard rumors that the very fact that this is going to be a 2-season thing is partially because of the pandemic. Apparently, according to some rumors, so take it with a grain of salt, that originally the episodes were going to be 12 episodes, and that the 6 episodes was there because of the pandemic, and they couldn't film the rest of it. So the second half of the story is going to be tied into season 2, supposedly. So keep putting those little air quotes around that whole aspect, because I keep hearing that same thing, and everything's going to happen. But it would explain some things with the actual story of this season, feeling like it doesn't necessarily fully culminate in one entire thing. In fact, this really does end off on a really big cliffhanger that some fans have either liked or not liked. One of my main reasons I didn't really enjoy WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier as much as some others is that because of the formula of what it's trying to do, is trying to be like a movie and a television hybrid, the very fact of, like, you can tell where, like, the beginning, midpoint, and end point is, it really feels like they had a 6-hour movie that they condensed down into, like, a TV show with little episodes, and that's why some episodes didn't really feel like it had, like, a natural end point. And I feel because of the fact that they split this into seasons rather than having it be a limited series, I feel like part of the whole monotony of that kind of gets cut in half a little bit, because every episode always had something new to tell. It always had something interesting to say about the characters of Loki, of the TVA, of everything else. And a lot of it is interesting. And I think one of the biggest keys to understanding Loki is that in its very essence, it's a show that breaks down dogmatic religious beliefs. How a lot of the people in the TVA, including people like Owen Wilson's Mobius, are told things that, you know, don't really require a lot of thinking, and here comes Loki, who tries to, like, question all that stuff. And so it really breaks down the whole dogmatic version of what the TVA stands for, where you have a bunch of, like, you know, timekeepers who created the entirety of the sacred timeline after a big cataclysmic war between the multiverse, and all these people are here to make sure the sacred timeline doesn't branch off into various multiverses, you know, and all that stuff. And I feel like this series, on top of WandaVision, it really got me to think about more about, like, how it all works, right? There's always, like, a mystery. Like, the thing I liked about WandaVision and the thing I still like about Loki is that both of them are kind of like mysteries in of itself, and they all deeply personally relate to the main character. Wanda's whole thing was that in WandaVision, she was grief-stricken, and she created this entire reality out of the fact that her grief took control of her. It's really interesting. And with Loki, it's basically him trying to find self-acceptance. And whenever he tries to trust people, especially people that are supposedly himself, he gets betrayed in the end. Because the whole part of self-acceptance, the biggest enemy that you have in terms of self-acceptance is yourself. Now, the way they go about telling that can be a little bit iffy, because I've seen some people really get distracted by the fact that, like, Sylvie's a variant of Loki, even though she's basically Enchantress. She's not Loki, I don't think, but who knows? I'm not entirely sure. Tom Hiddleston, once again, really knocks it out of the park as Loki. He truly knows what he's doing all the time. Like, every time he's on screen, he knows what he's doing, and he's a really good actor for this. Surprisingly enough, you have, like, Owen Wilson playing Mobius, who's just, like, this really interesting character. Like, I never expected in a million years that, like, Owen Wilson would be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in any way, but now we have it. I'm kind of sad, though, that, like, he didn't get to ride a jet ski, but maybe they'll reserve that for season 2. Not entirely sure how they're going to pull all this off. But another surprising thing was Jonathan Majors. Now, if you've watched the show, you'll know who Jonathan Majors is. But if you haven't watched the show, definitely, click off this video now, because I'm going to talk about the ending. Jonathan Majors was a really interesting surprise, because, yeah, we kind of figured it was going to be some variant of Kang all along, because, like, when you have to deal with the timeline and TVA, a version of Kang does actually maintain the TVA. It was just a matter of time before we actually knew anything about what was going on here. And so with Jonathan Majors in episode 6, we essentially get a really awesome improv performance that is very fun and actually brought up episode 6 quite a lot, because episode 6 is where a lot of exposition really goes overdrive, because exposition is like the biggest key in Loki, and episode 6 is essentially an entire 40-minute scene where Kang, or the one who remains, basically details his past, right? The fact that he's from the 31st century, the fact that he and various other people discovered the multiverse at the same time, and there was a whole multiversal war that pretty much left him the only one around, and basically continued to commit genocides and all this other stuff because he did not want another, like, multiversal war. Which also kind of explains a lot of the stuff from episode 5, where if you paid attention to episode 5 and The Void, you would see a lot of, like, Kang references, like, Kang Incorporated and all this other stuff, and it just does explain a lot of that stuff. And this is the whole, like, garbage bin of all these, like, multiverses, right? All these different things. So it makes sense that there would be things that would be reminiscent of Kang, right? And if this is the last Kang before the multiverse reopens itself, that's that's there. And there's also this other thing that's very existential about the show that I actually, like, wasn't expecting. Like, the very fact that, like, Kang the Conqueror knows exactly what is all supposed to happen before it happens is kind of scary, and takes away a lot of the free will and agency of pretty much any character if you really think about it. And it really brings up this interesting discussion question that some people could essentially have: the difference between free will and what isn't free will. What is derivative inside of ourselves that we don't actually have control of? And it's very interesting and kind of scary at the same time, seeing that final scene. Now, another person I want to bring up is Richard Grant as classic Loki. I was not expecting Richard Grant to show up and be like this, like, classical version of Loki with the weird costume from the original comics from the Avengers. And I was just blown away by how cool he was. He especially gets a really awesome VFX-laden scene in episode 5 that is just so magical that it's just awe-inspiring. And especially for TV, too. This is also one thing that I also want to point out. The VFX in Loki are astounding. All the visual effects just look so good, or most of them, rather. And for a TV-level budget, they've been able to do a lot. Now, granted, with the Disney Plus shows like Mandalorian and all that, they do have movie budget sizes behind all these TV shows. So it's not really, unexpected that the VFX would actually work. But it is still really amazing how much like stuff that they could do with this TV show in terms of like visual effects. I'd say the weakest character out of all of it is Sylvie. Sylvie, played by Sofia Diamartino, she does a pretty good job, but overall, I never really got a sense of who this character really was. There's some like lingering questions that I still have about the character that aren't fully explored, or rather, some of it's implied, right? Some of it is very implied, but there's nothing really that confirms any of it. So it just like, to me, I don't know. I think Sylvie is a pretty fine and interesting character, but I will say that her entire character's purpose is to basically go on this revenge spree, right? And like both Sylvie and Loki try to learn from each other throughout this entire thing, and try to, you know, see if they can like be better than what they are. And there's a moment in episode 5 that's like, oh yeah, you know, we're better together. But then like she, you know, distracts him and pretty much shoves him into an alternate timeline where Kang the Conqueror conquered everything and no one remembers him. I'd say like that's like the biggest betrayal in the show that like really affected me. I was like, what the hell, man? what the hell? Sylvie, what the... And then, you know, what I really like is how like Sylvie is so determined though. She's so determined into finding out who the person behind the TVA is, and putting an end to the TVA. And she always kept that momentum going, even if it meant to betray a person that she thought she could trust. So, in essence, both Lokis kind of betrayed each other. I've seen some people say, well, Sylvie got betrayed. Why are we giving hate to Sylvie? Well, both of them betrayed each other. See, the whole message of Loki is that the only person, as I said before, the only person standing in the way of self-acceptance, of self-worth, and self-growth is yourself. That's the whole point. And so it would make sense that both of these Lokis would eventually somewhat betray each other, either overtly or even subtle. But I will say with when Sylvie kills Kang the Conqueror, or the one who remains, I just love that look of like, oh shit, he really was right, and the whole multiverse is going to explode. And this leads to one of my bigger issues with the show, is that, and it's a tiny thing, it doesn't really affect the score overall, but one of the things that the Disney Plus shows were marketed as is that these would be things that you don't necessarily need to have watched in order to understand what's going to happen next. But because of what's happening so far with WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier and Loki, it really is going to be required to watch these shows, I feel like. Now, granted, I could be wrong. Maybe in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, we don't really get like a recap. We just get like, you know, I don't know how this is going to work. We'll have to find out with Spider-Man 3 later this year, and we're going to have to find out eventually again with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness next March, which is just cool for me because it's like, it comes out around my birthday, so that's cool. That's a whole other story. I also want to give a big shout out to the actress who plays B-15. I can't quite pronounce her name correctly, but she did a really cool job. I'm really glad that like actors from Lovecraft Country were brought into this show, because like they did a really good job. The actress who played B-15 and Jonathan Majors, I really liked them in Lovecraft Country, and to see them get more work is just great. Hey guys, I'm sorry to pause the video for a second to cut off myself in the past, but I didn't have time to set up my camera again, so I'm going to do an audio section of the Loki review. So if you wanted to turn off or whatever, just listen to me talk about the music for a second. One aspect of the show that I really did enjoy the most out of is Natalie Holt's score as a composer. She did bring a lot of just eerie sounds to the mix. A lot of the TVA sounds being with theremins and some electro type music that really just made the whole place kind of feel eerie, and really backs up the whole like otherworldly feel of what the TVA is and what it stands for. And then bringing in like a whole orchestral choir into later episodes to bring the massive scale of like the big scenes with Eliath in the Void is just amazing to me. So yeah, I think Natalie Holt's music in this show is some of the best I've heard in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, and is probably the most recognizable aspect of the entirety of the show, aside from the tunes from WandaVision. So, yeah, I'll cut this back over to past self. So, yeah, take care. Now, I want to point to this other topic with Loki's bisexuality. As someone who is bi, myself, I will say this. It is very rare to show men loving men in a bi relationship. It is very rare. However, there are some people that are upset by the fact that they clearly had Loki say that he has had relationships with men, but then shipped him with, a woman character. And saying that that's like queer baiting. I don't know if you realize this, but like part of being bi is being attracted to both men and women. You know what I'm saying here? Now, granted, there is a point to be said that because bisexuality is viewed as like straight passing by some people will say things like, oh, well, now they're using bi people as a way to kind of circumnavigate the whole critique of queer baiting, which does exist. And yes, they kind of did do some queer baiting in this show, I will admit. But I will say this. If you're expecting Disney at any point to show any type of relationship like that, it's like waiting for pigs to fly. It's not going to happen. I would want it to happen. I would love to have Owen Wilson and, like, Tom Hiddleston ride a jet ski in Season 2 at the end of it and just ride off into the sunset, kind of like Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy at the end of Season 2 of Harley Quinn. I would love to see that, but I don't think it's going to happen. It's rare that a big studio would allow that. Now, who knows? Who knows? Maybe in the future they'll have some good representation for the LGBT community. But I will say this. Saying that bi men can only date men in a TV show and that's how they have to prove that they're bi, I think that's a little bit redundant. Or not really redundant, but just like it erases a part of being bi, right? That's the whole thing with that. Now, granted, we could talk about the whole gender fluid aspects because, they probably needed to show more female Loki variants, maybe, to really show the gender fluidity of the character. But that's a whole other bag of worms, and, they probably could have. They probably should have. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, as it were. But aside from those issues, I found Loki to be a fun, entertaining, and very interesting piece in Marvel's repertoire that I'm hoping gets resolved in Season 2 in a way that is fulfilling and is really entertaining and rewarding. So, yeah, that's all I really have to say about Loki at this point in time. I'm going to give Loki a B+. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of Loki. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Whatever. Leave your comments in the comment section down below. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. And I'll see you guys in the next review. Peace.